The Stanley Hotel Room, 217, where nightmares became immortal. A true story of terror, tragedy, and literary inspiration. High in the Colorado Rockies, 5 miles from the entrance to Rocky Mountain National Park, stands a white Georgian Revival hotel that has become synonymous with supernatural terror. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park commands attention not just for its architectural beauty or its panoramic views of Lake Estes and Long's Peak, but for one particular room on its second floor. Room 217 has earned a reputation as one of the most haunted hotel rooms in America, a place where a catastrophic explosion nearly claimed a life in 1911, where a master of horror found inspiration in 1974, and where even Hollywood's funniest comedian couldn't make it through the night in 1994. This is not a work of fiction. This is not embellishment for entertainment. What you are about to hear is the documented, verified history of a room that has become a portal between our world and something we cannot fully explain. The story of Room 217 begins not with ghosts, but with ambition, illness, and the determination of one man to build a legacy in the mountains. The inventor who defied death, June 1st, 1849. Kingfield, Maine. Twin boys entered the world, identical in appearance and nearly identical in destiny. Freeland Oscar Stanley and Francis Edgar Stanley would grow up to revolutionize photography and transportation, but their greatest legacy would be tied to a hotel in a place they had never seen, in mountains they couldn't have imagined. The Stanley twins were raised by parents who valued education above all else. Their father, Solomon Stanley, was both a farmer and a teacher, instilling in his sons a love of practical knowledge, science, and the arts. From the age of 9, the boys demonstrated entrepreneurial spirit, making and selling maple sugar to buy school clothes and mathematics textbooks. This wasn't child's play. This was preparation for empire building. After graduating from Farmington State Normal School, both brothers became teachers. Freeland met Flora Tileston in 1876, and they married, beginning a partnership that would last until death and, according to many, beyond. But teaching wasn't enough for the ambitious Stanley brothers. In 1885, they left their jobs and founded the Stanley Dry Plate Company in Lewiston, Maine, creating photographic plates that revolutionized photography. The business made them wealthy. 4 years later, they relocated to Watertown, Massachusetts, and started another photographic plate business. When they sold this company to George Eastman in 1904, the Stanleys were rich men. But wealth means nothing when death comes calling. In 1881, Freeland contracted tuberculosis, the same disease that killed his 27-year-old brother, Solomon Liberty. Tuberculosis was one of the leading causes of death in the early 1900s, a relentless bacterial infection that destroyed the lungs over time, causing violent coughing fits and slowly suffocating its victims from the inside. The disease came and went in waves of severity, earning its nickname, consumption, because it consumed you piece by piece. Believing that survival depended on a less sedentary life, Freeland turned to manufacturing, opening the Stanley Practical Drawing Set Factory. But in 1882, fire destroyed his business and his investment. It seemed that every time the Stanley brothers faced disaster, they emerged stronger. After Francis suggested they work together on a new photographic product, the brothers established the Stanley Dry Plate Company, which would make them millionaires. But it was their next venture that would make them famous. In 1896, Freeland and Francis attended the Brockton County Fair and saw a steam-powered car. The brothers looked at each other, and without words, they knew. They would build a better one. By 1897, they began manufacturing steam-powered automobiles. The Stanley Steamer became the most popular steam car in America, with their vehicles setting speed records and earning accolades for reliability and power. Then, in 1903, at the age of 54, Freeland Oscar Stanley received a death sentence. His tuberculosis had returned with catastrophic force. Doctors gave him less than a year to live. The prescribed treatment was grimly simple. Go somewhere with fresh, dry air, eat hearty meals, get plenty of sunlight, and prepare to die comfortably. Dr. Sherman Grant Bonney of the University of Denver recommended Estes Park, Colorado, comparing its climate to Davos, Switzerland, the posh resort for European tuberculosis patients. On June 29, 1903, Stanley saw Flora off by train and stagecoach while he set out in his Stanley steamer automobile. It was a bold decision. At the time, few people in Colorado had seen an automobile, much less a steam-powered vehicle that looked and smelled like a miniature locomotive. Stanley drove to Lyons and stayed at Welch's stage stop. The proprietor, Mr. Welch, thought attempting to drive up the rough, narrow dirt road to Estes Park was insanity. The car's rounded front looked like a coffin supported on spindly wheels. But the following morning, Welch watched Stanley take off in a cloud of steam up the steep road. 1 hour and 50 minutes later, after stopping several times for water, Stanley reached Estes Park. He walked into Sam Service's general store on Elkhorn Avenue and used the town's only telephone to call the skeptical Welch. He had done it. The first automobile had arrived in Estes Park. What happened next defies medical explanation. Over that summer in the mountains, breathing the thin, clean air at 7,522 feet above sea level, Stanley's health improved dramatically. He gained weight. His coughing subsided. His strength returned. The man who was supposed to be dead within months was experiencing what his doctor could only call a miracle. Impressed by the beauty of the Estes Valley and grateful for his recovery, Stanley decided to return every summer. But this wasn't going to be a rustic camping trip. With the help of English architect Henry Rogers, known as Lord Cornwallis, Stanley began construction of a summer home called Rockside in 1904. The house had 4 bedrooms, gracious living areas, and a modern kitchen for Flora to entertain guests. Stanley designed a basement with space for a billiard table and a detached garage with a violin workshop and a turntable so the steam car could exit without reversing. The front door opened onto a veranda facing south with a view across the Estes Valley toward Long's Peak. Stanley would live to be 91 years old, dying of heart failure in Newton, Massachusetts in 1940, 37 years after he was supposed to be dead. Every one of those summers was spent in Estes Park, the place that saved his life. But Freeland Oscar Stanley wasn't content with saving himself. He wanted to save the town, the Lord, and the land. Before the Stanley Hotel could rise, the land itself had a dark history written in blood, deception, and broken promises. To understand Room 217, you must first understand the ground beneath it. In 1872, Wyndham Thomas Wyndham Quin, the 4th Earl of Dunraven and Mount Earl, arrived in the Estes Valley from Ireland. Born February 12, 1841, to aristocratic privilege, educated at Christ Church in Oxford, this Anglo-Irish nobleman was a journalist, landowner, soldier, sportsman, and conservative politician. He had served as Under-Secretary of State for the colonies, but his passion was hunting wild game across the world. Lord Dunraven met and befriended Texas Jack O'Mahundro, the famous scout and performer who acted as his guide on buffalo and elk hunts. When Dunraven explored Yellowstone Park in 1874, he documented the journey in his book, Hunting in the Yellowstone or on the Trail of the Wapiti, with Texas Jack in the Land of Geysers. But it was the Estes Valley that captured Dunraven's imagination completely. He decided to claim the entire valley as his personal hunting preserve. There was one problem. Foreigners were banned from establishing homestead claims under American law. But Lord Dunraven was clever and wealthy. He hired Theodore White, a young engineer, to help execute a scheme that would make him one of the largest foreign holders of American lands. First, Dunraven had the land surveyed and platted so it could be opened for homestead filing by May 1874. Then, he convinced U.S. citizens, mostly Denverites, who had never seen Estes Park, to claim the parcels. These were dummy homesteaders, men willing to sell their souls for gold, as one reverend later put it. After the homesteaders filed their claims, Dunraven would buy the parcels back for $5 to $10 an acre, with total parcel prices around $2,200. The titles were then transferred to Dunraven's British holding company, Estes Park Company Limited. By the time Dunraven finished his land grab, he controlled approximately 8,000 to 15,000 acres in the Estes Valley, virtually the entire park. In 1876, he built the Estes Park Hotel, also known as the English Hotel, a grand wooden structure meant to accommodate wealthy British hunters who would come to kill elk and bear in his private preserve. But the American settlers who lived in the valley were not amused. They saw through Dunraven's schemes. They disputed his claims, kicked up legal challenges, and exorbitant land taxes piled up. The Earl found himself in constant litigation. Managing the property from Ireland proved impossible. The locals hated him with a passion that bordered on violence. One man who loudly opposed Lord Dunraven was James Nugent, better known as Rocky Mountain Jim. A trapper and frontiersman with half his face disfigured from a grizzly bear encounter, Mountain Jim controlled important real estate at the head of Muggins Gulch, dominating the main entrance to Estes Park. His name struck fear across the Rockies, but his land made him a target. Ill feelings developed between Jim and Griff Evans, one of Dunraven's associates. On June 19, 1874, Evans shot Mountain Jim. The circumstances remain disputed to this day. Some say it was over a woman. Others claim it was about land. Mountain Jim lingered for months before dying with the bullet still lodged in his brain. Dunraven made his last visit to Estes Park in 1882. 2 years later, he left Colorado for good, never to return. As he later wrote, people came in disputing claims, kicking up rows, exorbitant land taxes got into arrears, and we were in constant litigation. The show could not be managed from home, and we were in constant danger of being frozen out. So we sold for what we could get and cleared out, and I have never been there since. For years, the land sat in legal limbo. Multiple suitors attempted to purchase it. All failed. Until 1907, when Burton D. Sanborn of Greeley arranged a deal to purchase Dunraven's remaining 6,600 acres for $80,000. But Sanborn didn't have the full amount. He reached out to Freeland Oscar Stanley for assistance. On June 16, 1908, Stanley and Sanborn completed the purchase from Lord Dunraven. Interestingly, plans for the Stanley Hotel had already started in early 1907, before the land sale was finalized. Stanley had confidence his dream would happen. He knew he could build a resort in this mountain valley that would rival the opulent hotels of New England. The land was his. The vision was clear. Construction could begin. But the spirits of those who came before, Lord Dunraven and Rocky Mountain Jim, would never truly leave. They would remain, waiting in the walls and walking the halls, long after the hotel rose from the earth that had witnessed so much violence. Building a palace in the clouds. By 1907, Freeland Stanley's health had completely recovered. He and Flora loved their summers in Colorado, but they weren't satisfied with the rustic accommodations, lazy pastimes, and relaxed social scene of mountain life. Stanley wanted to turn Estes Park into a proper resort town, a destination worthy of the wealthy East Coast elite who composed his social circle. He resolved to build a grand hotel. Stanley chose a site overlooking the Estes Valley with an unobstructed view of Long's Peak. Working with Denver architect T. Robert Weger, his friend Henry Lord Cornwallis Rogers, and contractor Frank Kirchhoff, Stanley designed a Georgian revival structure that would evoke the historical architecture of New England while incorporating modern comforts that were revolutionary for 1909. The main hotel would be a steel frame structure on foundations of random rubble granite, with clapboard siding and an asphalt shingle roof. Stanley originally chose a yellow ochre color for the exterior with white accents and trim, though this would later be painted white during Roe Emery's ownership in the 1930s. Lumber for construction was harvested from the areas of Bierstadt Lake and Hidden Valley in what would become Rocky Mountain National Park. But the real innovation wasn't the building itself. It was what powered it. Stanley built the Fall River Hydro Plant to supply electricity to his hotel. This wasn't just for convenience. This was Stanley establishing himself as a pioneer. The Stanley Hotel would be one of the first hotels in the entire country to be fully electrified from the lighting to the kitchens. Every guest room would have a telephone. Each pair of rooms would share an ensuite bathroom with running water supplied by Black Canyon Creek, which had been dammed in 1906. Stanley also sold electricity to Estes Park citizens, not by metering usage, but by selling light bulbs. He built the town's first wooden pipe water distribution system. He improved roads. He established a bank. Freeland Oscar Stanley wasn't just building a hotel. He was engineering an entire town's leap into the modern age. Inside the hotel, Flora Stanley selected wallpaper and carpets with an artistic eye for detail. The music room featured cream-colored walls with picture windows and fine classical plasterwork designed for letter writing during the day and chamber music at night. This was more than a hotel. It was an expression of culture, refinement, and the positive progress of American civilization. The 48-room hotel officially opened on July 4th, 1909. It was a spectacular debut. Stanley had arranged for a convention of Colorado pharmacists to be the first guests. He had 21 8-passenger touring cars waiting at the Loveland Depot to transport them up the newly finished road through the Big Thompson Canyon. Stanley had one more surprise prepared. Earlier in the day, he'd placed a full-size, realistic stuffed grizzly bear on an overhanging rock along the route. When the caravan reached the bear, Stanley, riding in the lead car, acted terrified. The entire procession came to a sudden halt. The pharmacists were ready to defend themselves before realizing it was a practical joke played by their host. Reviews of the Stanley Hotel placed it among the finest hotels in the world. Wealthy Easterners flocked to experience this mountain paradise. The Vanderbilts stayed there, the Rockefellers, the Astors, the DuPonts. 4 presidents would eventually stay in the presidential suite: Wilson, Harding, Roosevelt, and Nixon. The hotel was everything Stanley had dreamed, a beacon of luxury in the wilderness, a testament to human ingenuity and determination, a place where the elite could breathe clean mountain air and restore their health as Stanley himself had done. For 2 years, everything was perfect. Then, on the evening of June 25, 1911, room 217 exploded. The night the hotel exploded. Sunday, June 25, 1911. The day after the hotel's gas pipes had been filled for the first time. The evening seemed ordinary at first. At approximately 7:30 p.m., the Fall River Hydro Plant experienced problems. The lights in the Stanley Hotel flickered and died. This was the first power outage since the hotel opened 2 years earlier. Freeland Stanley, ever prepared, had installed a backup system. Every guest room was equipped with acetylene gas lanterns that could be lit in case of electrical failure. The gas had been piped throughout the hotel the previous winter, but the system had never been used. The hotel staff had been trained on the procedure: light the lanterns, keep the guests comfortable, wait for power to be restored. According to hotel records, guests were gathered in the lobby while staff moved through the building to light the gas lamps. On the second floor, the head chambermaid was making her rounds. Historical records identify her variously as Elizabeth Wilson, Elizabeth Lambert, or Lizzie Leitenberger, reflecting the confusion in contemporary newspaper reports. The Colorado Springs Gazette identified her as Elizabeth Wilson of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, though when the Lancaster newspaper tried to verify this, they noted her name didn't appear in local directories. What we know for certain is that the head chambermaid was dedicated, competent, and trusted by the Stanley family. This was supposed to be a routine task. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that there was a gas leak somewhere on the second floor. According to hotel archivist Jesse Freitas, acetylene gas had no odor in that time period, making it impossible to detect. As the chambermaid moved through the west wing, the colorless gas was filling the space between the ceiling of the dining room and the floor of the second story, accumulating pressure, waiting for ignition. At 7:50 p.m., she entered room 217, which was then the presidential suite. In her hand was a lit candle. The explosion was instantaneous and catastrophic. The concussive force was so powerful that it blew apart much of the west wing. Witnesses reported seeing a bathtub fly up into the air. The blast was heard over a mile away in Estes Park. At least 10 plate glass windows on the ground floor shattered. The explosion destroyed about 10% of the nearly 70,000 square foot hotel. The force of the blast threw the chambermaid into a hole in the floor. Contemporary newspaper accounts dramatically claimed she was hurled from the second to the first floor into the McGregor dining room below. However, the most detailed and apparently accurate account from the Fort Collins Express clarifies what actually happened. She was caught by timbers and held in the wreckage until rescued, not thrown completely through to the dining room. Covered in dust and debris, with both ankles broken from the concussion of the explosion, she was pulled from the wreckage. Miraculously, incredibly, impossibly, she was alive. The explosion destroyed approximately 10% of the 70,000 square foot hotel, with damages estimated at $10,000. It was a compression explosion, meaning it actually put out its own fire, according to archivist Jesse Freitas. If flames had spread, the timber frame structure would have burned to the ground. Contemporary newspaper accounts vary significantly in their details, revealing both the confusion of the moment and the challenges of early journalism. The Denver Post reported that Elizabeth Lambert was fatally injured, which proved incorrect. Other reports mentioned additional staff members caught in the blast, including Miss Colburn and Mary Donaldson, who supposedly fought fires with extinguishers. The Colorado Springs Gazette added that 7 total people were injured. Based on the most comprehensive reporting, the chambermaid suffered broken ankles, and other hotel staff sustained various injuries. All the injured were reportedly taken to Longmont Hospital, though little documentation of these patients exists today. Notably, none of the contemporary reports mentioned a thunderstorm causing the power outage, despite this detail appearing in some later retellings. All reports agree the explosion occurred around 7:50 to 8 p.m. The chambermaid lay in that hospital, her body broken, her future uncertain. Freeland Stanley, demonstrating the character that defined him, paid for all her medical care. After what appears to have been approximately 2 months of recovery, after suffering through broken ankles and other injuries from the blast, she made a decision that might seem impossible to understand. She returned to work at the Stanley Hotel. According to hotel records and newspaper accounts, she continued her duties as a chambermaid, working at the hotel until 1950, nearly 4 decades after the explosion that should have killed her. What happened to her after retirement remains unclear and disputed. Some accounts claim she passed away in 1952 from heart failure. One version even suggests she died in room 217 itself. However, hotel archivist Jesse Freitas confirms that no employee records from that time period remain at the hotel, and no photograph of the chambermaid can be found under any of her various names. She is a mystery wrapped in tragedy. We don't know what she looked like. We have no image of her face. The confusion over her actual name, the conflicting newspaper reports, and the absence of employment records create an almost ghostly quality to her very existence in historical documentation. But we know her dedication. We know her courage. We know she survived something that should have been impossible and returned to serve the hotel she clearly loved. And according to hundreds of witnesses over the decades, many believe she never truly left. The ghost who keeps house room. 217 today looks nothing like it did in 1911. After the explosion, the presidential suite was rebuilt and subdivided. The original L-shaped room that took up the space now occupied by both room 217 and room 215 was split into two separate accommodations. The floral wallpaper Flora Stanley had selected, bright with reds, pinks, and greens, was replaced. The grass-green carpet with red and blue details was torn out. But in February 2014, pieces of that original decor were discovered in the bowels of the hotel, 103 years after the explosion. Fragments of wallpapered drywall and carpet blown into the structure during that catastrophic blast were finally found. When matched against photographs of room 217 before the explosion, the materials confirmed the story. The explosion was real. The destruction was real. The chambermaid's survival was real. And so, according to countless witnesses, some believe her continuing presence is real as well. The reports began years after the explosion, though exactly when remains unclear. Staff members noticed peculiar occurrences in room 217. Luggage would be unpacked overnight, with clothes carefully folded and placed in drawers. Items would be moved from one location to another with no explanation. Lights would turn on and off with no one touching the switches. The room would be meticulously tidied even when housekeeping hadn't entered. If one accepts the possibility of the supernatural, the spirit could be described as helpful rather than frightening. This interpretation makes sense if the entity is indeed the former chambermaid. Keeping rooms clean and organized had been her job, her purpose, her life's work. Based on this reasoning, perhaps in death, she simply continues what she'd always done. But the chambermaid also had another reputation, one that gives her a more complex character in these accounts. According to tour guides and multiple guest testimonies, she was old-fashioned and proper. The stories suggest she does not approve of unmarried couples sharing a bed. Couples staying in room 217 have reported a disturbing phenomenon. In the middle of the night, they describe feeling a cold presence settling into the bed between them. An invisible force, like ice forming between their bodies, pushing them apart. They wake in the morning to find the man's belongings packed in his luggage and placed by the door, as if someone is telling him to leave. One couple told staff their bed was made around them during the night, while they were still in it. They claimed to feel the covers being tucked in, felt the pillow being adjusted beneath their heads, all while lying there in the darkness, unable to see who was performing this intimate and terrifying service. Tour guides at the hotel have collected these stories for decades. They speak of the former chambermaid with affection and respect, describing the presence as helpful rather than malevolent. Based on the pattern of reports, they suggest she's not trying to harm anyone, but rather continuing to do her job, maintaining the standards she held in life. However, there's something deeply unsettling about the idea of an invisible presence entering your room at night, touching your belongings, arranging your clothes, making judgments about your moral behavior, and intervening in your sleep. Helpful or not, it's an invasion that strips away any feeling of safety or privacy. The stories multiplied over the years. Staff members reported feeling watched in room 217. objects would disappear and reappear in different locations. The bathroom faucet would turn on and off by itself. Closet doors would open and shut with no one near them. Some guests reported hearing what sounded like a woman's voice speaking softly in the darkness, though they could never make out the words. Paranormal investigators who've spent time in room 217 have captured what they interpret as electromagnetic field fluctuations, unexplained cold spots, and what they call intelligent responses on spirit boxes. Photographs taken in the room sometimes show orbs or misty shapes that weren't visible to the naked eye. Video footage has captured objects moving slightly, though skeptics argue these could be vibrations or natural settling of old furniture. The hotel embraced the reputation rather than denying it. Room 217 became their most requested accommodation, booked months in advance by ghost hunters, paranormal enthusiasts, and fans of supernatural terror. The room's connection to the explosion gave it historical gravitas, but it was another event, 63 years after the blast, that would transform Room 217 from a local curiosity into an international symbol of horror. On October 30th, 1974, a struggling writer checked into Room 217 with his wife. His name was Stephen King. And what happened that night would change not just his career, but the entire landscape of modern horror literature. The nightmare that became The Shining, October 1974. Stephen King was 27 years old, married to fellow author Tabitha King, and facing a crisis of creativity. He had recently published Carrie and Salem's Lot, both set in his home state of Maine. He needed a change of scenery. He needed fresh inspiration. He and Tabitha had recently moved to Boulder, Colorado, and he was tinkering with an idea about a boy with psychic abilities in an abandoned amusement park. But the logistics weren't working. The story felt stuck. King and Tabitha decided to take a drive through the Rocky Mountains, trying to jumpstart his imagination. They were looking for ideas, atmosphere, anything that might unlock the story spinning in his head. As they drove through unfamiliar mountain passes, their plans were derailed by an early winter storm that blocked their route. Forced to turn back, they passed a large, imposing hotel they'd noticed earlier. The Stanley Hotel. It was late in the season, October 30th, and they had no reservations, but with nowhere else to go, they decided to stop. They arrived just as other guests were checking out. The hotel was closing for the winter the next day, and only a skeleton crew remained. The staff was preparing to shut down the massive 48-room structure for the long Colorado winter when roads would be impassable and the building would stand empty in the snow. Stephen and Tabitha King were told they would be the only paying guests that night, the only people staying in that enormous, empty hotel overlooking the darkening mountains. They were assigned to room 217. According to King's later accounts, the hotel was fully available to them. Room 217, being one of the best rooms in the house, and the former presidential suite, was a logical choice for the hotel's last guests of the season. That evening, the Kings had dinner in the grand dining room, completely alone except for each other. All the chairs were up on tables. Canned orchestral music echoed through the empty halls. The dining room staff offered them one choice for dinner, the only meal still available. They ate in that cavernous space, listening to the music drift through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. After dinner, Tabitha returned to room 217 while Stephen wandered the hotel. He walked those long, empty corridors. He explored the ballroom. He stopped at the bar where a bartender served him drinks. Years later, King would wonder if that bartender was real or a figment of his imagination. The staff was supposedly minimal. Who was this man who poured his whiskey and listened to his thoughts? King eventually returned to room 217. He went to bed beside his wife in that room where Elizabeth Wilson had nearly died 63 years earlier, in a hotel perched on land where Lord Dunraven's schemes had unfolded and Rocky Mountain Jim had been murdered. He fell asleep surrounded by history he didn't know, by ghosts he couldn't see. Then came the nightmare. In King's dream, he saw his 3-year-old son running through the corridors of the Stanley Hotel. The boy was looking back over his shoulder, eyes wide with terror, screaming in absolute panic. Behind him, hunting him, was a fire hose that had come to life. The hose coiled and uncoiled like a massive snake, pursuing the child through endless hallways. King woke with a tremendous jerk, sweating all over, within an inch of falling out of bed. His heart was pounding. The nightmare had been so vivid, so terrifying, that it took him several moments to remember where he was. He got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Tabitha. He stepped out onto the balcony. The October air was cold. The mountains were invisible in the darkness. He lit a cigarette and stood there, looking out at nothing, his mind racing. By the time he finished that cigarette, the bones of The Shining were firmly set in his mind. The isolated hotel, the winter caretaker, the family trapped by snow, the building with a dark history, the child with psychic abilities, the father's descent into madness. All of it came together in those few minutes on the balcony of room 217. King himself would later write on his website, "In late September of 1974, Tabby and I spent a night at a grand old hotel in Estes Park, the Stanley. We were the only guests as it turned out. The following day they were going to close the place down for the winter. Wandering through its corridors, I thought that it seemed the perfect, maybe the archetypical, setting for a ghost story." He described the experience in another interview. "It was like God had put me there to hear that and see those things." But King saw more than empty corridors that night. According to some accounts, he also witnessed the ghost of a young child in the corridor outside his room. Whether this was part of his waking experience or something his mind incorporated into the nightmare remains unclear. King himself has been somewhat cryptic about the exact nature of what he experienced at the Stanley Hotel. What's certain is that he returned to Boulder with a complete novel in his mind. The Shining was published in 1977. It became his first bestseller, cementing his reputation as a master of horror and launching him into literary stardom. The novel's Overlook Hotel is not a perfect replica of the Stanley. King's fictional creation is darker, more malevolent, with a history of violence and murder that the Stanley never actually possessed. But the bones are there. The isolated mountain hotel, the off-season closure, the long corridors, the sense of something watching from the shadows. In the novel, the haunted room is 217, just like at the Stanley. When Stanley Kubrick adapted the book for film in 1980, he changed it to room 237, reportedly at the request of the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, where exterior shots were filmed. The Timberline didn't want guests avoiding their own room 217. King was famously dissatisfied with Kubrick's adaptation. The director had changed major themes, altered character motivations, and created something that felt, to King, like a betrayal of his vision. So in 1997, King wrote and closely monitored a television miniseries version of The Shining. This production was filmed at the Stanley Hotel itself, using the actual building as the Overlook Hotel, honoring the place where the story was born. Today, Channel 42 at the Stanley Hotel plays The Shining on a continuous loop. Guests can watch Jack Nicholson's descent into madness while staying in the building that inspired it. The hotel leans into its connection to King's work, offering Shining-themed tours and ghost packages that include visits to room 217's door. Because of King's experience and the subsequent fame of The Shining, the Stanley Hotel was saved from financial ruin. In the 1970s, the hotel had fallen on hard times, losing its appeal to tourists and facing possible demolition. But after the book's publication in 1977 and the film's release in 1980, interest in the Stanley exploded. People wanted to stay where King had stayed. They wanted to walk where he had walked. They wanted to experience the terror themselves. Room 217 became impossible to book for Halloween. It remains booked solid months, sometimes years in advance. Guests pay premium prices, often over $500 per night, for the chance to sleep in the room where a master of horror found his muse. But Stephen King wasn't the last famous guest to flee from Room 217 in terror. 20 years after King's fateful night, Hollywood's funniest man would request that same room and wouldn't make it until morning. 3 hours of terror, Jim Carrey's unexplained night. The Farrelly brothers were filming Dumb and Dumber, a comedy that would become a cult classic. Much of the film takes place in Aspen, Colorado, though those scenes were filmed in Breckenridge and Park City, Utah. But the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park was chosen to stand in for the fictional Hotel Danbury, the luxury establishment where the characters stay. Jim Carrey was at the height of his comedic powers, filming iconic scenes including the famous race to the top of the stairs, the bar scene where they celebrate landing on the moon, and multiple interactions throughout the Grand Hotel. Carrey knew the Stanley's reputation. He knew about Stephen King's experience. He knew about Room 217, and he requested it. According to multiple reports from hotel staff and crew members, Carrey specifically asked to stay in Room 217 during filming. Perhaps he was curious, perhaps he wanted bragging rights, perhaps he didn't believe in ghosts and wanted to prove it. Whatever his reasoning, his request was granted. Jim Carrey checked into Room 217. 3 hours later, according to tour guide Sophie and other staff members, Carrey ran to the hotel reception in the middle of the night, demanding to be moved to a different hotel entirely. Not just a different room, a different building. He refused to go back to the Stanley for anything except necessary filming, and even then, he entered at the last possible second and left immediately when cameras stopped rolling. What happened in those 3 hours? Carrey has never said. He has steadfastly refused to discuss the experience publicly. When asked about it in interviews, he either changes the subject or gives cryptic non-answers that only deepen the mystery. Some reports claim he ran from the room half naked. Others say he was fully clothed but clearly shaken. All accounts agree on the essential facts. He went into Room 217. Something terrified him, profoundly, and he left without explanation. The experience disturbed Carrey enough that he brought it up years later. In 2012, while preparing for Dumb and Dumber 2, the sequel to the original film, Carrey approached filmmakers Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, known as the Daniels, with an unusual proposal. He wanted to make a found-footage horror movie set behind the scenes of Dumb and Dumber 2. According to Kwan, speaking on The Hollywood Reporter's Writers' Roundtable, Carrey said, Jim Carrey reached out. He had just seen Paranormal Activity and was like, guys, it's found footage and it's horror. Basically, the set of Dumb and Dumber was famously a haunted set. It was in the same hotel that The Shining was inspired by, and he's like, the whole time we were shooting, things were breaking, people were getting hurt, doors were swinging, and it felt haunted. We're gonna shoot Dumb and Dumber 2, and I want you guys to do a found-footage horror comedy on the set. While we're filming, you guys are going to make a feature-length behind-the-scenes video that slowly becomes a horror film. The Daniels wrote an outline. They were intrigued by the concept, but the studio rejected it, not wanting to make a film while trying to make another film. The proposed horror comedy exists only in legend, but the fact that Carrey brought it up years later suggests his experience at the Stanley Hotel had a lasting impact. He remembered the doors swinging, the things breaking, the people getting hurt, the feeling that something invisible and malevolent was watching them work. What did Jim Carrey see in room 217? What did he hear? What did he feel? We may never know. The man who made millions of people laugh, who built a career on fearlessness and physical comedy, found something in that room that stripped away his courage and sent him fleeing into the night. Tour guides love telling this story. They describe it with relish, watching tourists' eyes widen as they imagine what could frighten Jim Carrey badly enough to make him abandon his room. The story has become part of the hotel's lore, another layer of terror added to room 217's reputation. The Stanley Hotel's management neither confirms nor denies the specifics, maintaining a diplomatic stance that preserves the mystery while respecting Carrey's privacy. But staff members who were there, who saw him in those early morning hours, have whispered their versions of events for decades. Some say his encounter was with Elizabeth Wilson, that he felt her cold presence between the sheets or saw her moving his belongings. Others speculate he experienced something else entirely, something older and darker than the chambermaid's ghost. A few suggest he witnessed a full-body apparition, a figure standing at the foot of his bed that vanished when he turned on the lights. The truth remains locked in Jim Carrey's memory, and he's shown no indication he'll ever share it. Perhaps some experiences are too personal, too terrifying, too inexplicable to put into words. Perhaps he made a promise to himself never to speak of what happened. Or perhaps he simply knows that the mystery is more powerful than any explanation could be. Room 217 claimed another victim, not of explosion this time, but of psychological terror. And the legend grew. Spirits. Throughout the Stanley, while room 217 commands the most attention, the entire Stanley Hotel has earned a reputation as one of America's most haunted locations. Guest reports and staff testimonies suggest paranormal activity spreads throughout the building, touching nearly every floor, every hallway, every hidden corner. The fourth floor is particularly active according to numerous accounts. Originally, this floor was a cavernous attic used for storage during winter closures. Later, it was converted to lodging for female employees, nannies, and children. During the 1918 influenza outbreak, orphans were reportedly cared for on this floor. According to local history, many of those children never recovered. Today, guests on the fourth floor frequently report hearing what sounds like children's laughter echoing through empty hallways late at night. They describe the sound of small feet running as if playing games of tag or hide and seek. Closet doors opening and shutting on their own. Bed covers being yanked off sleeping guests as if by invisible hands pulling a prank. Room 418 is specifically associated with these childlike phenomena in guest reports. Visitors have witnessed lights flickering without explanation, hangers moving on their own in closets, and the sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. One 4-year-old girl staying in room 418 with her mother told of a little boy tickling her feet in the middle of the night. When she asked him to stop, according to her account, he disappeared. Tour guides speak of a child with autism named Billy, who, according to their stories, likes to roam the hotel and play with guests' hair. Visitors report feeling gentle tugging on their hair, turning around to find no one there. The sensation is described as playful rather than malicious, but it's deeply unsettling nonetheless. Many guests leave lollipops and small candies on the fourth floor as treats for what they believe are the ghost children. Hotel staff report finding these offerings moved to new locations, often in hard-to-reach spots like high shelves or wedged between furniture, as if the children are playing hide-and-seek with the gifts. Room 401 houses what witnesses describe as an unfriendly male entity. Guests report being touched by unseen hands, feeling pressure on their shoulders or chest, and experiencing doors that open and close with violent force. The atmosphere in 401 is consistently described as oppressive and unwelcoming, markedly different from the playful energy reported in other fourth-floor rooms. Room 407 is believed by some to be haunted by Lord Dunraven himself, the Irish Earl who once owned the land. Guests report seeing a dark, shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room, watching them sleep. The figure is described as wearing old-fashioned clothing and occasionally a wide-brimmed hat. Lights flicker in 407 with unusual frequency, and some guests report having their hair pulled by invisible fingers. Based on these accounts, the entity in this room is described as observant but not overtly hostile, as if the Earl is still surveying his domain from beyond the grave. Room 428 is home to a different kind of reported spirit. What many believe is the ghost of Rocky Mountain Jim Nugent, the legendary frontiersman who was shot in 1874. Guests in 428 report waking in the middle of the night to see a dark figure in a wide cowboy hat looming over their bed. Female guests specifically have reported feeling what they interpret as ghostly lips brushing their cheeks, a cold kiss from an invisible admirer. Some hear footsteps and the sound of heavy furniture moving on the floor above, despite room 428 being on the top floor of the building. This spirit, according to paranormal investigators, appears drawn to women, which would align with Jim Nugent's reputation as something of a ladies' man in life. The encounters are described as flirtatious rather than aggressive, but waking to find an invisible presence standing over your bed is terrifying regardless of its intentions. The grand staircase between floors has earned the nickname the Vortex. Paranormal investigators claim this area is a portal of spiritual energy, a place where the barrier between our world and the next is particularly thin. Guests report sudden cold spots on the stairs, feeling dizzy or nauseous as they climb, and the sensation of something invisible walking through them. Photographs taken on the staircase frequently show orbs, light anomalies, and occasionally what appear to be human-shaped mists. The theory is that two large mirrors facing each other from opposite sides of the lobby create a metaphysical portal into the spirit realm, allowing ghosts to move between dimensions. Whether you believe this or not, something about the staircase feels different. Even skeptics report a change in atmosphere when standing in that space. F.O. Stanley himself is said by some to still oversee his creation. Staff and guests report seeing a distinguished older gentleman in old-fashioned clothing appearing in the lobby, often standing near the reception desk as if checking in on operations. The figure is described as benevolent and observant, sometimes nodding in acknowledgement before fading away. Reports also place Stanley in the billiard room, his favorite leisure space, where visitors sometimes hear the click of billiard balls when the room is empty. Flora Stanley, F.O.'s beloved wife, is most often experienced in the concert hall, which was built specifically for her as a gift. The hall features a beautiful piano, and multiple guests and staff members have reported hearing music playing from the room when it's supposed to be empty. Some report seeing the piano keys moving on their own. Others claim to have witnessed the apparition of a woman in period dress sitting at the piano bench, her hands moving over the keys, creating melodies that drift through the empty building. Flora is also associated with the scent of roses, which were her favorite flower. Witnesses report suddenly smelling roses in areas where no flowers are present, particularly near the piano. The fragrance is described as pleasant but unmistakable, arriving suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. In the basement tunnels beneath the hotel, where employees once moved unseen by guests, paranormal activity runs particularly high. The tunnels are built on limestone and quartz, geological materials believed by some researchers to enhance spiritual energy. During ghost tours, visitors to the tunnels report feeling touched, hearing whispers, and experiencing sudden temperature drops. The concert hall basement contains what tour guides call the creepy mirror, an antique piece older than the hotel itself, origin unknown. Multiple guests over the years have photographed their reflections in this mirror, only to discover figures standing beside them in the image, figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. The shapes are described as shadowy, humanoid forms that seem to be watching from just outside perception. Throughout the hotel, vacuum cleaners malfunction with remarkable consistency. Staff members report that whenever they vacuum, the machines go haywire, turning off inexplicably or having their plugs pulled from walls by invisible hands. It's become a running joke among housekeeping that the ghosts hate vacuum cleaners, perhaps because Elizabeth Wilson preferred the quiet dignity of manual cleaning. The pet cemetery behind the hotel has its own collection of spirits. Guests report hearing a dog pawing at their door in the early morning hours, as if delivering a newspaper. This is believed to be Cassie, a golden retriever whose grave is in the cemetery. Another spirit, a fluffy white cat named Comanche, is sometimes seen wandering the grounds, appearing as a white blur that vanishes when approached. The ballroom occasionally echoes with sounds of parties, the clink of glasses and cheerful laughter carrying through empty spaces in the winter months when the hotel is supposed to be quiet. F.O. Stanley is often seen in this room, enjoying the fruits of his labor, watching over celebrations that continue in death as they did in life. Every floor, every room, every hallway has stories, shadowy figures caught in peripheral vision, voices speaking when no one is there, objects moving inexplicably, cold spots that defy explanation, feelings of being watched, followed, touched by invisible hands. The Stanley Hotel has become a laboratory for the paranormal, a place where the veil between worlds seems thinner than elsewhere. Paranormal investigation teams from television shows have documented phenomena that defy easy explanation. Ghost adventures, ghost hunters, paranormal witness, and numerous independent investigators have all spent time at the Stanley, emerging with electromagnetic field readings, electronic voice phenomena, and photographic evidence they cannot explain through conventional means. Skeptics argue that old buildings creak and settle, that drafts create cold spots, that electromagnetic fields are natural phenomena, that photographs can be manipulated or misinterpreted, that human psychology is prone to suggestion and pattern recognition that sees faces in shadows and meaning in randomness. All of this is true, but the sheer volume of reports, the consistency of experiences across different witnesses with no knowledge of previous accounts, and the specific recurring patterns of activity suggest something beyond mere imagination, or building settling is occurring at the Stanley Hotel. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the people who experience these phenomena believe. Their terror is real, their confusion is genuine, and the stories continue accumulating year after year, adding to the hotel's reputation as a place where the ordinary rules of reality don't quite apply. Living with legends. The Stanley today. The Stanley Hotel today is a thriving business that has fully embraced its paranormal reputation. Under current management, the hotel operates year-round, a stark contrast to the seasonal closures that once defined it. The building has been expanded to include multiple lodging options: the main Stanley Hotel, the Lodge, originally called the Manor House, the Aspire Hotel, and residences at the Stanley. The hotel now boasts 140 rooms across its properties, a significant expansion from the original 48. But it's the spirited rooms that command premium prices and book months, sometimes years in advance. These rooms include the legendary 217, along with 401, 407, 418, and 428 on the 4th floor. Booking room 217 today requires significant planning and financial commitment. The room starts at approximately $569 per night, often selling for even more during peak seasons or special events. Halloween bookings for room 217 are reserved years in advance by dedicated ghost hunters and horror fans willing to pay premium rates for the experience. You cannot reserve room 217 online. the hotel requires you to call directly, speaking with reservation staff who can check availability and confirm your booking. This policy helps manage the incredible demand and ensures guests understand what they're requesting. The number plate on room 217's door has been stolen so many times that the wall behind it is permanently damaged. The hotel now sells replica number plates in the gift shop, encouraging fans to purchase memorabilia rather than committing theft. Other haunted rooms are somewhat easier to book, but still require advanced planning. They typically start at $529 per night. Regular suites throughout the hotel range from $330 to $480 per night, offering luxury accommodations without the paranormal premium. The hotel offers multiple ghost tours throughout the day and evening. The historic Stanley tour is family-friendly, appropriate for children 5 and older, covering the hotel's history and architecture, along with stories of the haunted 4th floor. This tour costs approximately $25 per adult and $20 per child, running for 90 minutes. The Spirited Night Tour is more focused on paranormal activity, taking guests through the hotel's most haunted areas after dark. This tour is restricted to ages 10 and up, costs around $28 per adult, and frequently sells out in advance. Tour guides share detailed accounts of ghost sightings, explain how to use ghost hunting equipment, and take groups to locations where paranormal activity has been documented. The Shining Tour specifically focuses on Stephen King's connection to the hotel, including visits to locations that inspired scenes in the novel. This indoor and outdoor walking tour includes access to a historic cottage known as the Shining Suite, though interior access to room 217 itself is not guaranteed due to paying guests' privacy. Ghost Stories is the most family-friendly option, open to all ages, featuring a 1-hour tour of spooky tales designed to delight rather than terrify. Tickets start at $10 per adult. For serious paranormal investigators, the Stanley Paranormal Investigation Package offers extended access to haunted areas with professional ghost hunting equipment, including EMF meters, spirit boxes, and infrared cameras. These packages assign guests to 4th floor rooms and provide tools for conducting their own investigations. The package includes a mug bearing the famous message, "Red Rum," as a souvenir. Tours never enter occupied guest rooms, even on the Spirited Night Tour. The Stanley is a working hotel, and management carefully respects paying guests' privacy. Tour groups pause outside room 217's door while guides explain its history, but the door remains closed. If you want to see the inside of room 217, you must book a stay yourself. Parking at the hotel costs approximately $10, an additional expense on top of tour tickets. The hotel's location offers spectacular views of Long's Peak and the surrounding Rocky Mountains, making it a destination for nature enthusiasts as well as ghost hunters. In 2023, the Stanley opened the world's only cryonics museum and Frozen Dead Guy tour, adding another layer of oddity to the property's attractions. The museum explores the science and history of cryogenic preservation, honoring local legend Bredo Morstoyle, whose cryogenically frozen body was kept in a tough shed in nearby Nederland, Colorado, for decades. The 217 Wine Bar, converted from the music room in recent renovations, offers upscale dining with sweeping views of the Estes Valley. An art installation of violins hangs above the bar, positioned at intervals corresponding to the opening notes of the Shining movie theme song, a clever nod to F.O. Stanley's love of handmade violins. The hotel's main restaurant serves gourmet cuisine, and the bar specializes in The Shining-inspired cocktails, including the Red Rum Punch and locally brewed Red Rum Ale. Staff members are trained to share ghost stories with guests who express interest, though the hotel maintains a professional balance between embracing the paranormal reputation and operating a legitimate luxury accommodation. Management has a strict policy against hoaxing. Any staff member caught fabricating paranormal activity faces immediate termination. This policy helps maintain credibility with serious paranormal investigators and ensures that reported phenomena are genuine guest experiences rather than manufactured entertainment. The hotel offers special events throughout the year, particularly around Halloween. The annual Shining Ball, murder mystery dinners, and masquerade balls attract guests from around the world. October 2024 marked the 50th anniversary of Stephen King's stay, celebrated with a special ball and costume contest, encouraging guests to dress as characters from King's extensive catalog of work. Channel 42 in every guest room plays The Shining on continuous loop, allowing visitors to watch Jack Nicholson's iconic performance while staying in the building that inspired the story. The juxtaposition of watching fictional horror while surrounded by real-world mystery creates a unique psychological experience. In May 2025, the hotel underwent its largest ownership change in decades. The Stanley was acquired by the Stanley Partnership for Art, Culture, and Education, SPACE, a public-private partnership, for $400 million. This was the largest real estate transaction in the Estes Valley since Lord Dunraven sold 6,600 acres to F.O. Stanley in 1908 for $80,000. John Cullen, who had owned the hotel for 30 years and invested millions in its renovation and preservation, now serves as chair and CEO of SPACE. Plans include adding 65 luxury hotel suites, expanding wellness facilities, and continued investment in the property's historic preservation. The new ownership structure ensures the hotel will remain a cultural and economic anchor for Estes Park while maintaining its unique character. The Stanley Hotel employs multiple historians and archivists who maintain meticulous records of the property's history, though gaps remain, particularly regarding early employee records like Elizabeth Wilson's. Jesse Freitas, the hotel's archivist, has spent years piecing together the building's story, discovering artifacts like the wallpaper and carpet fragments from the 1911 explosion, and separating verified fact from accumulated legend. The hotel's approach to its paranormal reputation is sophisticated and balanced. They neither aggressively promote ghost stories nor dismiss them. Instead, they present the history, share documented experiences, and allow guests to form their own conclusions. This approach respects both believers and skeptics while maintaining the mystery that makes the location so compelling. The Stanley has become a pilgrimage site for horror fans, paranormal enthusiasts, and anyone drawn to the intersection of history, tragedy, and the unexplained. People travel from every continent to stay here, to walk these halls, to sleep in these rooms, hoping for an experience that will confirm or challenge their beliefs about what exists beyond death. Whether you encounter anything paranormal or not, staying at the Stanley Hotel offers a unique experience. You're sleeping in a building that has witnessed over a century of human joy, tragedy, ambition, and mystery. You're walking floors where presidents slept, where a catastrophic explosion destroyed lives, where Stephen King's nightmares were born, where Jim Carrey fled in terror. The building itself is beautiful, the views are spectacular, and the sense of history is palpable in every creaking floorboard and aged doorframe. The ghosts, whether real or imagined, whether spirits or psychological projections, add a dimension of unease that transforms a simple hotel stay into something more profound. The truth behind the mystery. What really happens in room 217? After examining the history, the eyewitness accounts, the documented evidence, and the verified facts, we're left with more questions than answers, and perhaps that's exactly as it should be. The explosion of June 25, 1911, is documented fact. Newspaper accounts, hotel records, and physical evidence confirm it happened. Elizabeth Wilson's survival is documented. Her decades of continued employment at the hotel are verified. The wallpaper and carpet fragments discovered in 2014 prove the explosion's destructive force. But did Elizabeth Wilson's spirit return to the hotel she served for most of her adult life? That question has no definitive answer. Stephen King's stay in room 217 on October 30th, 1974 is documented fact. His nightmare about his son being chased by a fire hose is confirmed by his own accounts. The creation of The Shining directly from that experience is verified. But did King experience genuine paranormal phenomena, or did his writer's imagination combine with the hotel's atmosphere to create inspiration? King himself has suggested both possibilities at different times. Jim Carrey's abrupt departure from room 217 in 1994 is confirmed by multiple hotel staff members who were present. His refusal to discuss it publicly is documented. His later proposal for a found-footage horror film about the hotel suggests lasting impact. But what exactly frightened him? We may never know. The hundreds of guest reports of paranormal activity over decades create a pattern that's difficult to dismiss entirely. While individual accounts can be explained by suggestion, misperception, or natural phenomena, the consistency of certain experiences, particularly in specific rooms, suggests something beyond pure coincidence. Paranormal investigators have captured electromagnetic field readings, temperature fluctuations, and electronic voice phenomena that they cannot explain through conventional means. Skeptical researchers have attempted to debunk these findings, sometimes successfully, but not always. Some phenomena remain genuinely mysterious. The question of whether ghosts exist is ultimately philosophical rather than scientific. Our current understanding of physics and biology provides no mechanism for consciousness to persist after death. But our understanding of the universe is incomplete, and dismissing all paranormal reports as hallucination or fraud seems as dogmatic as accepting all of them as proof. What we can say with certainty is that the Stanley Hotel, and room 217 in particular, affects people. Whether through genuine spiritual contact, powerful psychological suggestion, or some combination of factors we don't fully understand, guests emerge from experiences they're changed. Some are terrified, some are comforted, some find their beliefs confirmed, others have their skepticism challenged. The hotel exists at the intersection of documented history and enduring mystery. The chambermaid's explosion and survival are facts. The reports of her continued presence are testimonies that deserve respect, even if they can't be scientifically verified. Stephen King's inspiration is fact. The source of that inspiration, whether purely internal or influenced by external phenomena, remains debatable. Perhaps the most honest answer is that we don't know. And the uncertainty, the possibility that something inexplicable might touch us in that room, is what makes the experience so compelling. Room 217 doesn't offer proof of the afterlife. It offers possibility, mystery, and the unsettling sensation that our understanding of reality might be incomplete. The hotel's management, the tour guides, and the serious paranormal investigators who study the location all share a common approach. Present the facts, share the experiences, and let each person decide for themselves what's real. Final thoughts. A legacy written in terror and wonder. The Stanley Hotel Room, 117, has earned its place in American cultural history through an extraordinary convergence of tragedy, inspiration, and mystery. From Elizabeth Wilson's miraculous survival to Stephen King's nightmare to Jim Carrey's flight, Room 217 has accumulated layers of story that transform it from a simple hotel accommodation into something approaching legend. The room represents the American fascination with the paranormal, our desire to believe that death is not the end, that consciousness might persist in ways we don't understand. It embodies our love of ghost stories, particularly when those stories are rooted in verifiable historical events. And it demonstrates how places can become repositories of meaning, attracting energy and attention that transform them into something beyond their physical structure. Freeland. Oscar Stanley built his hotel to share the mountain air that saved his life. He wanted to create a beacon of culture and civilization in the wilderness. He succeeded beyond his dreams, though not in the way he imagined. His hotel became famous not for its luxury or its views, but for its ghosts. The building he created has become a place where people come to confront their beliefs about life, death, and what might lie between. Elizabeth Wilson's dedication to her work, her miraculous survival, and her decades of service have been immortalized not in monuments or plaques, but in the stories guests tell of sheets being straightened by invisible hands, of disapproving cold presences between unmarried couples, of lights turning on and off in empty rooms. Whether her spirit truly walks those halls, or whether guests' experiences are psychological responses to suggestion and atmosphere, her legacy endures. Stephen King's nightmare transformed not just his career, but the entire hotel's fate. Without The Shining, the Stanley might have been demolished in the 1970s, torn down as too expensive to maintain during the energy crisis and economic uncertainty of that era. Instead, King's novel and the subsequent films brought international attention that saved the building and turned it into a destination. His terror became the hotel's salvation, and Jim Carrey's unexplained flight adds a modern chapter to the story, proving that Room 217's reputation continues to grow, that new people continue to experience something they cannot explain, that the mystery persists across decades and generations. The Fourth Floor's children, Lord Dunraven's shadow, Rocky Mountain Jim's flirtatious ghost, F.O. Stanley overseeing his creation, Flora Stanley playing piano in the concert hall. All these spirits, whether real or imagined, have become part of the fabric of the place. They're woven into the experience of staying there, adding psychological weight to every creaking floorboard, every flickering light, every unexplained sound in the night. Paranormal investigators continue studying the hotel, accumulating thousands of hours of footage, recordings, and readings that they believe document genuine supernatural activity. Skeptics continue visiting, hoping to prove that everything can be explained by natural causes, psychology, and imagination. Both groups find what they're looking for, confirming their prior beliefs, because the Stanley Hotel is vast enough and complex enough to support multiple interpretations. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, in that uncomfortable space where we must admit we don't have all the answers. Perhaps some of the reported phenomena are genuine contacts with something beyond our understanding. Perhaps some are misperceptions amplified by suggestion and atmosphere. Perhaps the building itself, through some mechanism we don't comprehend, records and replays traumatic events like the explosion. Or perhaps consciousness, emotion, and dedication can leave impressions on places that sensitive people detect. We don't know. We may never know. And that uncertainty is precisely what makes Room 217 so compelling. What we do know is that people continue experiencing things they cannot explain. They continue being touched, frightened, comforted, and changed by their time in that room. Whether those experiences are spiritual, psychological, or something else entirely, they're real to the people who live them. The Stanley Hotel and Room 217 will continue drawing visitors from around the world, all seeking their own encounter with mystery. Some will see ghosts, some will see nothing but old furniture and fading wallpaper. Both groups will leave with stories to tell, adding new layers to a legend that began with an explosion in 1911 and grew through Stephen King's nightmare in 1974. Room 217 stands as a testament to the power of place, the persistence of story, and the human need to believe that reality contains more than we can see or measure. It's a room where documented history meets enduring mystery, where tragedy transformed into legend, where dedication to duty might, according to those who believe, have transcended death itself. The lights still flicker there sometimes. Objects still move without explanation. Guests still wake to cold presences and the sensation of being watched. Whether the former chambermaid truly lingers in her beloved hotel, or whether the accumulated weight of belief and expectation creates experiences through sheer psychological force, the effect is the same. Room 217 continues to terrify, inspire, and mystify everyone who enters. And somewhere in that mystery, in that space between what we know and what we believe, Room 217 keeps its secrets, waiting for the next guest brave enough to sleep, where nightmares became immortal, where an explosion changed a life, where horror found its muse, and where the line between our world and whatever lies beyond grows perilously, thrillingly thin. For more true mysteries like this, subscribe to Lore 2 Mystery and explore the documented, verified stories that are stranger and more terrifying than any fiction.